Hi, everybody, and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're doing a top 10. Topic of this top 10, ex-football players in wrestling. Now, the way I graded this was kind of based on their combined success. Some of these guys are going to be more successful in the football realm, some in the wrestling realm, but when you put it together, everyone on here either played for a major college football team or made it to the NFL, or in at least one case, two cases actually, the AFL before the merger, or actually right around the merger. The time's kind of murky. With that being said, let's jump right in. Number 10, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who played for the Atlanta Falcons. There was a time in Mid-South Wrestling where Hacksaw Jim Duggan was the biggest star they ever produced. He was a massive player in that company. Then he would go on to the WWF, WWE now, and kind of fit into that second fiddle or secondary role, and not in a bad way. He was always the Hulk Hogan ally, or in the secondary feud with the second most important heel. And at the time, that was a great spot to have. It wouldn't be like now. If Duggan was around in this era in the WWE, he would have won a championship. But because most of the 80s were dominated by Hogan holding the title, he got kind of stuck in that role of fan favorite that's always a bridesmaid and never the bride. An extremely charismatic and legendary character, a wrestler that everybody that watched wrestling in the 80s knows. How can you say 80s wrestling without giving a big thumbs up and a ho for Hacksaw Jim Duggan? Now going from that, our number 9, Brian Pillman of the Cincinnati Bengals, and before that, Miami of Ohio. Brian Pillman was a special team standout on the Bengals, and if not for injuries, he probably would have had a very successful career. For those of us who've been around a while, he kind of was like a Steve Tasker kind of player from the Buffalo Bills. A very talented wrestler, very talented football player. He definitely played bigger in both sports than his stature. He was a small guy among the land of giants in both football and wrestling, but left an indelible mark. I mean, to this day, 25 years after his death, wrestlers are still being compared to Brian Pillman, and there's not been hardly any that have lived up to that mantra. Pillman was a trailblazer. He was ahead of his time. I do believe if he would have lived just a few years longer, he would have been one of the hugest stars in the history of wrestling. He was the Attitude Era before the Attitude Era officially became the Attitude Era, if that makes a lot of sense. Just an amazing talent. One of my favorite wrestlers of all time, Flying Brian Pillman. I'm going from that, our number 8, Big E, hailing from the University of Iowa. Now this one may be a little bit of a personal bias. I love Big E. I am so excited to see what he does next. Hopefully he can make a full comeback. And a lot of people seem to forget that when Big E was on Iowa, he was a major player on one of the historically great teams in college football. He's gone on to wrestling and became part of one of the most legendary tag teams / factions in the New Day. Been a world champion, an extremely charismatic wrestler, someone that everybody all over the world loves. Just an amazing talent. I love Big E, so I had to put him on my list. Now going from that, our number 7, Chief Wahoo McDaniel. Wahoo McDaniel played for the Oilers, the Jets, the Dolphins, and I believe there was at least one other team, I believe the Broncos. During his NFL career, I'm pretty sure he was on the Jets Super Bowl team. I might have my timing a little bit off. I do know he was on the Dolphins expansion team. He was one of their first players, and he was on the Oilers very early in their lifetime too. Wahoo was a legend in football. He's what we would know as a journeyman, a guy that was always really good, never quite a Pro Bowler. However, in pro wrestling, he had a 30-year career that spanned it all over the globe with everybody knowing who he was. Just another legendary wrestler that had an amazing career in both sports. He's probably one of the most even on both levels on this list. A lot of these guys are more successful in wrestling than football, but Wahoo was pretty much as successful in both. Just a great wrestler, a great talent, hence why he's on my list. Now our number 6, the Big Cat Ernie Ladd. The Big Cat Ernie Ladd was a legendary defensive player for the San Diego Chargers and also a Hall of Fame wrestler. I'm pretty sure he's in the Hall of Fame with the Chargers, and I probably should have wrote that down. If I'm wrong, correct me down here in the comments, but I'm pretty sure he's in the NFL Hall of Fame, because I do believe when he went into the Wrestling Hall of Fame, the WWE Hall of Fame, they mentioned that he's a Hall of Famer in multiple sports. Just a nightmare to deal with on the football field and a nightmare to deal with in the ring. A great wrestler during what was known as the territory days, a really huge territory star, a guy that was a main event talent everywhere he went, just an amazing guy, an amazing athlete, and one of the best NFL players to become a wrestler. I'll go from that to number 5, Big Van Vader and the LA Rams. Before Leon White had a legendary career as Big Van Vader, before he was even the baby bull in AWA, he was a lineman for the Los Angeles Rams. And like a lot of guys on the list, injuries stopped his football career, but he would go on to be one of the great big men of all time, having legendary runs in both Japan and WCW, All Japan, Noah, New Japan, WCW. He even went to WWE. Wasn't as successful in the WWE as in other places, but he's still looked at very fondly as one of the best big men of all time. An absolutely great talent, hence why he's on our list here. I'll go from that, our number 4, Roman Reigns from the Georgia Tech football team. Roman was drafted by the Vikings, and I believe he even had a short stint with the Jaguars. Didn't quite make either team due to injuries, and this is when his leukemia first came up. But as a college player, Roman Reigns was a massive star. He was on a fast track to be an NFL player, to be a great NFL player. We've seen him transition from that, go into the family business, and arguably one of the best wrestlers in the world. He's got the hardware to prove it. He's got the multiple WrestleMania main events, multiple year championship run in an era where that's almost impossible to do. He's been the highlight of every show he's been on pretty much since he became a wrestler. Another fantastic wrestler, the real head of the table, one of the top stars in wrestling right now, Roman Reigns. I'll go from that, our number 3, Ron Simmons, aka Farouk, who was a Heisman Trophy finalist with the Florida State Seminoles, and according to Bobby Bowden, the best player he ever coached. Also had a short stint with the Cleveland Browns in the NFL. Much like a football star like Tim Tebow, he didn't quite transfer into the NFL. I do believe there were some injury issues there as well, but his college football career is one of the legendary football careers of all time in college. He's right up there with Billy Sims, with Tim Tebow, with Doug Flutie, with some of the all-time greats. He's right up there in that mix. Ron Simmons is one of those guys that transcends both sports. In wrestling, he became known as the first African-American world heavyweight champion when he won the WCW championship. That's arguable, but at the time, for a national company, he was the first. And he would go on to break ground everywhere he went. His tag team with JBL, who's another person that, spoilers, could have made this list, but he didn't quite get on here. Just a legend in wrestling. It's kind of sad that he's just narrowed down to his damn. But even with that, puts a smile on my face. Just being able to see Ron Simmons come out on the shows where the legends are there, and even for 1 second he just gives that stare with a disappointing look, and then all of a sudden you know what's coming out. Damn! I love Ron Simmons. I hope you guys love him as much as I do. That's why he's this high on my list. Now, coming from that, our number 2. It's actually a wrestler I'm not a huge fan of, but I gotta be subjective. I can't argue with the man's success. Bill Goldberg, who also played NFL football for the LA Rams, the Atlanta Falcons, and almost called them the Florida Panthers. That's hockey, though. The Carolina Panthers. As you can see, there's a couple teams, the Falcons and the Rams, that have had a couple of these players on there. Bill Goldberg was a solid defensive player, mostly in Georgia, in college, and then for the Falcons he was really good. He was good on the Panthers as well. Again, he was another guy that got derailed a bit by injuries, went into wrestling. I wasn't a huge fan of Goldberg's. I'm still not a huge fan of Goldberg's, but the man's success cannot be argued. I mean, he set the world on fire in WCW. He made himself a legend in WCW. Heck, so much so that 20 years later, he was still legendary in a different company altogether, WWE, and won championships there as well. Just a phenomenal athlete, a one-of-a-kind specimen who I think I probably would have liked better if he didn't have so many people tearing him in different directions and giving him bad advice. But even with that, I can't deny the man's talent. That's why he's on the list. Now, before we get to our number 1, we do something here called the best of the rest. Basically, things that were thought of for the list but didn't quite make it. First up, Baron Corbin and the Colts and the Cardinals. He was on the Indianapolis Colts and the Arizona Cardinals. Say what you will about Baron Corbin, and I've criticized him at times myself, but the guy shows up to work. He does whatever's asked of him. He smiles. He does whatever silly gimmick they ask him to do. And if he comes down to it, he's actually a pretty talented guy. I mean, is he going to be Roman Reigns? No. Do I ever see Baron Corbin headlining a WrestleMania? Probably not. But if you give me a mid-card storyline with a character that I could believe in for 6 months and then it's going to switch, it's your guy. Baron Corbin's that dude. I mean, he's a model of consistency for this generation. He's a model of turning chicken shit into chicken salad. His Happy Corbin stuff to me was some really good stuff. Now, it did get a little bit corny at times, don't get me wrong, but I think it was really good. And even before that, when he was depressed and he was down on his luck, that was awesome. How he let his hair grow out, all of that. I just think the guy doesn't get quite as much credit as he should. An amazing talent in both sports. That's why he was thought of for the list, but didn't quite make it. Last but not least, on the best of the rest, Steve Mongo McMichael of the Chicago Bears. Look, Mongo gets a lot of criticism for his WCW wrestling career. He wasn't that terrible. He was a former U.S. champion. His commentary, I think, was pretty bad. I did not like him as a commentator. I did like him as a wrestler. I had a lot of joy watching Mongo, especially as one of the Horsemen. But you gotta put it like this. Steve Mongo McMichael's on arguably one of the top 2 or 3 teams of all time, the '85 Chicago Bears. You could put that team up against any team in NFL history, and they're going to hang with them. I mean, they have a legendary defense, so Refrigerator Perry, Steve McMichael, Mike Singletary, Jim McMahon at quarterback, Walter Payton at running back, and there's probably 5 other Hall of Famers that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. Anytime you could put that on your resume, you're a successful dude. Now, before we get into our number 1, if you think I put someone too high, someone too low, left someone off the list altogether, let me know in the comments. While you're there, smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. And now for our number 1 wrestler that came to us from the world of football, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson from the University of Miami. Look, you can argue that Dwayne Johnson had the worst football career out of anybody on this list. He did. I'm not saying that at all. But when you could put a guy that's probably one of the most recognizable wrestlers in the history of wrestling, he's up there on that short list with Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, Ric Flair, and that's it. Maybe John Cena. So Cena, Rock, Austin, Flair, Hogan. That's the guys. You can walk into any grocery store in America, and 95% of the people that you ask as you pass, do you know who Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is? They're going to say yeah. And a lot of them are going to say yes, he's a wrestler or an actor. They may know him more from being an actor, but they do remember his wrestling career. One of the greats that ever did it, in my opinion, the best football player turned wrestler. Now, before we do get off of this, the reason for this video, and a lot of you people that have been longtime viewers of the show, you may already know this. I'm a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan. At the time I'm recording this, we're about a week and a half off from the Super Bowl. Before the Super Bowl, the Eagles are going to play against the Kansas City Chiefs. So that gave me the idea for this video. Before I did get off of this, I did have one more thing I wanted to say. Fly, Eagles, fly. Let's go out there and get our 2nd Super Bowl ring. And if you made it all the way to the end, if you're not an Eagles fan, let me know who your favorite team is. If you're an Eagles fan, or if you're just cheering for them to win the Super Bowl, put Fly, Eagles, fly down here in the comments. With that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Top 10.